What's the easiest thing in the world to do? I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to sit there and think, now let's see, how am I going to sin today? I don't have to work at that. It just comes so naturally, so easily, that all of a sudden I'm hardly out of bed and I'm like, oh, oops, I sinned. Sin is the easiest thing in the world to do. That's what the scripture says. If you look at that passage in Romans chapter 7, verse 15 and following, you'll see a very complicated statement by the Apostle Paul about everything that he wants to do, he can't do. He wants to do good things, but for some reason, he only does bad things. He doesn't want to do bad things, but for some reason, that's all he can do. And he's so conflicted by this experience because the easiest thing in the world to do is to sin. There are many things in the Bible that are assumed. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, anybody know what it says? In the beginning, what? In the beginning, who? God. Does it try to explain God? Does it try to prove God? No, it assumes God. In the beginning, God. And it goes from there. And it doesn't have to try to communicate why there's a God, where there's a God, all the rest of that about God. It just said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's just assumed. That's also what the scripture says, the one that you just read right now. Sin is assumed. If you say you don't sin, you're deceived. All of us sin. It's assumed. If you say you don't, not only are you deceived, but you're making God a liar, because God says all have sinned and come short of God's glory. So sin is assumed. Now, sin is not a good thing, right? When we sin, we kind of stink like sin. Sin is like, well, it's sort of like a skunk. Yeah, I had a trip once from Wisconsin all the way down to Arizona. I had just rolled my car, so my car was all smashed up. And actually, that's when I became a Christian. On that trip, on the way home, I stopped, and a friend of mine at St. Paul Bible College led me to the Lord. So instead of going directly home, he said, stay here for a week and meet other Christians and build your life up. So I did, and during that week, somebody at that college had a beautiful Volkswagen Bug. You know, VW Bug? I had a VW Bug that rolled 7 times, end over end, smash, crunch, ugly, bad. Somebody at that school had a beautiful Volkswagen Bug that the engine blew up in. So he had a beautiful outside and ugly inside. I had ugly outside, but I had a brand new engine in my banged up Volkswagen. So he gave me that beautiful Bug, and I towed it behind my ugly Bug all the way from, that was St. Paul, Minnesota, all the way down to Arizona. And I got kicked off the road many times, kicked off the Kansas Turnpike because the policeman didn't think my car was safe. But in between the 2 cars, there was a trailer hitch. And my car was kind of smashed down, and then the trailer hitch kind of went up to the nice car. And somewhere along the road, I drove over a skunk. that hit that trailer hitch and flipped up. I had no back window because it was all smashed out from the accident, and it went over into my back window. And my car was not only ugly, but it stunk. I stunk. And there's no perfume that can cover up an ugly skunk smell. That's true about sin. There's nothing that can cover it up. Sin is like that skunk. If you play with the skunk, you're going to smell like the skunk. Sometimes I say sin is like a barn. When I lived in Wisconsin, I worked on a farm. All day long, my boss had many acres of timber land, so he was a logger. But he kept milk cows at the barn. And every morning at 4 o'clock, every afternoon at 4 o'clock, you had to milk the cows. And one day, we were going to go to church after we milked the cows one Sunday morning. But I left a milking machine, I left it in the barn instead of moving it to the milk house. And so we're getting in the car, ready to go, and my boss said, "Ken, you left milker in the barn. Go fetch it and move it to the milk house." So I'm dressed for church, and so I ran in the barn for 1 minute and took the milker and put it in the milk house, and I got back in the car. You know what they said? "Woo, you stink." You just go near it, and it makes you stink. That's the way sin is. You can't get away from it. That's what happened with this story here. It's about when Saul met Samuel. Samuel came, and Saul had gone into battle, and he was supposed to kill everything and not bring any bounty, any loot back. Everything was dedicated to the Lord. It was to be killed, and nothing was to be taken as a prize. And so Samuel came, and Saul greeted him. "Oh, Saul, I'm glad you're here. I just finished the job. I did everything God told me to do." Now you can imagine, before this scene, Saul had actually disobeyed God, and he got all the animals and all the sheep and all the cattle. And so they were all there. So you can just see him. As he sees Samuel coming, he tells his people, "Keep those cattle quiet. Keep those sheep quiet now." So Samuel came and he said, "Oh, hi Samuel, I did everything God told me to do." But sure enough, some cow back there. Moo, whatever Koreans say cows make. What's a Korean cow sound? Meh. Okay. What about the goats? Oh, sounds the same to me. Of course, that's the way Korean is, right? Okay. So, Samuel says, "Wait a minute. What's all this bleating of the sheep and all these cows making all this noise?" You see, he couldn't cover it up. He couldn't hide it. He had sinned before God. Sin is the easiest thing in the world to do. So, what do you think is the worst thing in the world to do? The worst thing in the world to do is to deny or lie about the easiest thing in the world to do. That's the worst thing in the world to do, is to try to hide it. There's no reason to hide it. In fact, all these cover-ups, you know how many politicians got in trouble for cover-up? First they get in trouble because they did something wrong, then they get in double trouble because of cover-up.